People like you do not deserve a passport." The words cracked through the air like a whip. The woman in the blue uniform leaned forward, her grip tight on the Navy booklet now bent in her hands. Her voice was not private. It was meant to echo, meant to wound. Around them, travelers froze mid-step. Some gasped, others raised their phones, and at the center of it all stood a black woman in a white suit, calm, still, watching the insult descend on her like a storm she had already predicted. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below, and if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change. And we are glad you are here. Now, back to Maya. She did not flinch. She did not plead. She simply held out her boarding documents, her tone level. "Run my name," she said. But the attendant sneered, snapping the passport spine further, her voice rising so the entire line could hear. "Scammers think they can walk into first class dressed like that? Not today." Gasps rippled across the terminal. A man in a gray blazer muttered, "Fraud, clear as day." Another whispered, "Security should be here already." The air tightened. The fluorescent lights above hummed as if amplifying the tension. Maya's silence became heavier than the insult. She remembered a lobby in Atlanta 20 years earlier, when a clerk told her parents that she did not look like someone who belonged there. The same tone, the same certainty, now replayed at an airport gate with cameras rolling. A young traveler near the rope line lifted his phone higher, the red light blinking. His voice shook but carried. She gave her passport. They just tore it. "This is insane." The room shifted. Strangers leaned closer, drawn into a spectacle that should never have happened. The attendant smirked, pressing the torn passport against the counter as if it were a trophy. "You will not be boarding this flight," she declared. And in that instant, the silence that followed was not compliance. It was the pause before the storm broke. The manager arrived like a gavel striking hardwood, footsteps loud, posture stiff, eyes already fixed on Maya as if judgment had been passed before a word was spoken. His badge swung against his chest as he leaned over the counter. "We do not allow frauds to stall international flights," he barked. "Escort her away before she causes more trouble." Maya's hand did not tremble. She placed her phone slowly on the counter, screen dark, untouched, as if to say she had nothing to hide. Her gaze did not leave his face. "Run my name," she repeated, each syllable steady, deliberate, impossible to mishear. The crowd stirred. A woman in line clutched her boarding pass tighter. A man adjusted his glasses and whispered, "Why not just check the system?" But the attendant who had torn the passport smirked as if the outcome was already carved in stone. She folded her arms across her uniform, her voice sharpened. "Scammers know the game. Delay, deflect, play the victim. We have seen it all before." Beside her, a security officer shifted into position. The black strap of his belt glinted under the lights, hand hovering close to his cuffs. He did not speak, but his presence was a threat in uniform. Maya stood still, every movement measured, her silence stronger than a shout. That quiet unnerved them. It unnerved everyone watching. A young trainee at the desk, barely in her 20s, stared at her screen. On it, a single name flashed green with full clearance. Dr. Maya Johnson. Her lips parted, but fear pressed them shut again. She looked at the manager, then back at Maya, then down at her own trembling hands. The truth was there, but she was not ready to speak it. Not yet. The room seemed to tighten like a fist. Phones raised higher, recording angles from left, right, and center. A father with a child on his hip muttered, "This is wrong." The child blinked at the tension, too young to know the history unfolding, old enough to feel its weight. The manager slammed his palm on the counter. "Remove her now." His tone was sharp, calculated, designed to break her dignity in public view. But Maya did not move. Her eyes lifted slowly, steady and unblinking. She had heard this voice before, not in this building, but in 100 moments where authority mistook skin for guilt. She exhaled once, calm and unhurried, then spoke in a voice low but clear enough for every camera to capture. "Your mistake is louder than mine." The words hung in the air, heavy, unshakable. And as the uniformed officer took one step closer, the room knew the storm was only beginning. The security officer's boots struck the floor with slow, deliberate thuds. Each step echoed like a countdown. He stopped inches from Maya, his hand tightening on the cuffs, his voice flat, practiced, stripped of humanity. "Ma'am, you are being detained. Step away from the counter now." Gasps rippled through the crowd. A woman in a navy trench coat raised her phone higher, whispering to the lens, "They are about to cuff her for standing still." The man beside her shook his head, disbelief etched into every line of his face. The flight attendant who had torn the passport leaned forward, triumph flashing in her eyes. "This is what happens when people try to cheat the system," she declared loudly, making sure every bystander heard. Her words were not procedure, they were performance, a script rehearsed too many times before. Maya did not retreat. She did not reach for her phone. Her voice, when it came, was soft but unyielding. "Run my name," she said again. But the words fell like pebbles against a wall of arrogance. The manager folded his arms and scoffed. "Enough of this act. You think calm eyes and fancy clothes change the fact you do not belong here?" A young man near the rope divider could not stay silent. He stepped forward, his phone camera aimed squarely at the desk. "She gave you everything. Passport, boarding documents, identification. You tore it up in front of all of us. This is not protocol. This is profiling." His voice trembled but carried, and heads around him began to nod. The trainee at the desk felt her throat tighten. She glanced once more at her screen. The truth blazed in green letters, undeniable. "Dr. Maya Johnson, confirmed passenger, executive clearance." But her fear was a chain around her voice. She looked at Maya, then at the cameras, and pressed her lips shut again. The security officer reached out, hand closing the space between them. Phones rose like a forest, red recording lights blinking. Maya's breath was steady, her posture rooted, her silence louder than the commotion. Then a voice pierced the tension from somewhere behind the crowd. "Check the system. Why will no one check the system?" It came from an older man in a gray cap, his face flushed with outrage. "Because you already know what you will find." The crowd stirred. Whispers turned into murmurs. Murmurs turned into words that could not be ignored. They know. They just do not care. The attendant's jaw tightened. She snapped back. "Stay out of this. This is airline policy." Maya's eyes lifted to her, steady, cutting. "Policy is not what you tore in half," she said quietly. That was dignity. The silence that followed was not empty. It was the sound of a room shifting, the moment when disbelief begins to harden into fury. And though the officer's hand still hovered near her arm, the weight of every raised phone pressed heavier than any badge on his chest. The officer's hand hovered just above Maya's wrist, but he hesitated. Not because of doubt, but because of the dozens of lenses fixed on him. Phones from every angle, cameras blinking, passengers whispering. The entire gate transformed into a courtroom without walls. The flight attendant smirked, mistaking the silence for victory. She straightened her jacket and turned to the nearest phone, speaking louder than necessary. "Film all you want. Fraud does not turn into fact just because strangers believe it." Her tone dripped with contempt, every syllable sharpened to cut. Maya's head tilted slightly, calm eyes fixed on her. She did not blink. Her voice came slow, steady, carrying weight heavier than the uniform across from her. "You have mistaken silence for surrender. That was your first mistake." The crowd rippled at her words. A woman in a red scarf whispered to her husband, "She does not sound like someone lying." He nodded slowly, his phone still raised. The manager stepped closer, his shadow falling across the counter. "Enough theater. Remove her now. She is holding up real clients." His words cracked across the space like dry wood snapping. Maya's chest rose with a slow inhale. She remembered another time, age 23, in a New York bank lobby, when her account was frozen for suspicion despite collateral triple the requirement. She remembered standing there, hearing the same tone, the same accusation, "You do not belong." That memory did not weaken her. It built the armor she wore now, silent, invisible, impenetrable. The trainee at the desk felt her heart pounding so loud it drowned the announcements over the speakers. She looked again at the glowing green clearance on her monitor. It was undeniable. Her lips parted, but the manager's stare was a muzzle. She bit the inside of her cheek and stayed silent. A young father in the corner rocked his toddler, shaking his head. "This is not security," he muttered. "This is humiliation." His voice carried just enough for three others to nod in agreement. The officer took another step forward, tension in his jaw. His fingers brushed the metal cuffs. The weight of authority and the pull of doubt battled in his stance. Maya did not retreat. Her feet stayed planted, as if anchored to the tiled floor itself. She raised her chin slightly and spoke, voice cutting through the static hum of the terminal. "If you put your hands on me, you will not just be detaining a passenger. You will be exposing exactly what this airline chooses to protect." Her words cracked through the air. The attendant faltered for the first time, her smirk slipping. The manager shifted uncomfortably. The officer's hand froze inches from her sleeve. The silence that followed was different now. It was not compliance. It was pressure. Pressure against the people in uniforms who thought power meant unquestioned authority. Pressure from every phone, every eye, every witness. And Maya stood in the center, calm, still, unshaken, waiting for the storm to break. From the far side of the terminal, a voice trembled but carried. A teenage girl, holding her phone high, whispered to her mother, "Why are they doing this to her? She gave them everything." The mother's reply was quiet but heavy. "Because sometimes proof is never enough when you look like her." The words spread like sparks in dry grass. Murmurs swelled, weaving through the crowd, no longer whispers but open discontent. A businessman with silver hair stepped forward, his voice sharp. "You are detaining a paying customer without verification. That is unlawful." He pointed to the counter, his hand steady. "Check the system. Run her name." The flight attendant snapped, "Stay in your lane. You do not know what you are talking about." She held the torn passport higher, like evidence in a trial she believed she had already won. Her uniform glinted under the fluorescent lights, but her authority was cracking. The manager leaned into the crowd, eyes narrowed. "She is not a client. She is a con artist." His tone was loud, decisive, meant to shut down doubt. But the more he barked, the less convincing he became. Behind the desk, the trainee's hands trembled above the keyboard. The screen screamed the truth in green letters. Dr. Maya Johnson, executive clearance, verified ticket, valid passport. Every check passed. She swallowed hard. Her lips parted, then closed again. Fear strangled her words. Maya turned slightly, her eyes resting on the young employee. She did not speak, but her gaze was steady, urging. The kind of gaze that said, "Your voice matters." The trainee's chest heaved with the weight of silence, the kind of silence that had already destroyed too many careers and too many lives. From the crowd, a middle-aged woman raised her phone higher. "This is profiling," she said loud enough for the officer to hear. "I am recording every second." Others followed, lifting their devices, the sea of red recording lights now undeniable. The officer hesitated again, his hand still hovering near Maya's wrist. The authority he carried now felt fragile under the flood of eyes. His voice, once flat, carried a hint of unease. "Ma'am, you are not complying." Maya's answer came without a tremor. "I am not resisting. I am standing." She spoke with calm steel, her words slicing the air clean. "What you call non-compliance, the world will see as dignity." Gasps rippled through the gate. The businessman nodded fiercely. The teenager whispered, "She is right." Even the officer's brow furrowed, doubt creeping where certainty once lived. And for the first time, the balance shifted. The uniform no longer held the strongest weight in the room. It was Maya's silence, Maya's composure, and Maya's presence that pressed down hardest. The crowd was no longer watching a passenger about to be removed. They were watching a reckoning unfold. The manager's patience snapped like brittle glass. He slammed his palm flat on the counter, the sound ricocheting across the gate. "Enough. This is my terminal. My word is final. Security, take her out now." His voice rose to fill the space, but instead of authority, it carried the sharp edge of desperation. The crowd recoiled at his words. A woman clutching a stroller gasped, pulling her child closer. A college student in a hoodie muttered, "His terminal? Who talks like that?" Another voice followed, stronger. "He is covering fear with noise." The current of doubt grew heavier with every whisper. The flight attendant leaned forward, her eyes burning with contempt. She jabbed a finger toward Maya. "She is a fraud. She bought that passport online. Do you not see? Look at her clothes. Look at her." The insult cut sharper than the torn booklet. Gasps rippled like a wave. Phones rose higher. The businessman with silver hair barked back, "Your prejudice is showing, and it is being recorded." His tone carried the weight of a verdict. The young trainee at the desk pressed her lips tight, her hands still frozen above the keyboard. The system on her screen glowed green again. Dr. Maya Johnson, confirmed, verified, valid. Every letter screamed truth, her throat constricted with the need to speak. but fear still pinned her down like iron chains. Maya's eyes shifted toward her, not pleading, not demanding, just steady, patient, urging. The gaze of someone who had carried this weight for decades, and who now offered someone else the chance to break free of silence. The officer shifted uneasily. His hand hovered near the cuffs, but the chorus of phones and the weight of eyes pressing on him made his shoulders tense. His voice cracked as he repeated, "Ma'am, please comply." But the words lacked conviction. Maya inhaled once, slow and controlled. Her voice was measured, calm, unwavering. "Comply with what? The destruction of my documents? The erasure of my identity? I will not comply with injustice. I will endure it. I will expose it." The terminal fell into a hush, broken only by the hum of the air conditioning and the click of recording phones. Even the manager faltered, his mouth opening but no words forming. From the back, the teenage girl who had been filming earlier raised her voice, small but piercing. "She belongs here. You know she does." Her mother placed a hand on her shoulder, pride and fear mixing in her eyes. The crowd shifted again. This was no longer silence. It was pressure, building, growing, undeniable. For the first time, the balance of power wavered. The uniformed staff, who had spoken with such certainty, now stood on the edge of exposure. And Maya, still calm, still unshaken, stood at the center of it all, the storm waiting for her signal. The breaking point came not with a shout, but with the tearing sound of paper. The flight attendant, her face twisted with fury, held up the visa page that had been inside the passport. With one sharp tug, she ripped it in half, the pieces fluttering down onto the counter like discarded scraps. "This is worthless," she declared, her voice cutting through the terminal like a blade. "You are not going anywhere. Not today. Not ever." The gasp from the crowd was immediate and collective. A woman dropped her purse to the floor. A child whimpered. A man in line muttered, "She just destroyed federal property." Another answered, "That is not policy, that is hatred." The officer stiffened, clearly unsettled, but his hand still hovered near the cuffs. He looked to the manager for direction, but the manager only doubled down, his voice booming with false authority. "Detain her now. We will let the authorities sort it out." Maya did not flinch. She watched the shredded paper fall as if it were a storm she had already endured 100 times before. Her eyes lifted slowly, steady, unblinking. "You believe tearing paper erases a person, but paper does not define me." The crowd stirred. Phones rose higher, every lens capturing the moment. The teenage girl whispered to her mother, "She is still so calm." The mother replied, "That calm is stronger than their rage." "Oh." The businessman with silver hair stepped forward, his voice sharp as steel. "That was not protocol. That was vandalism. You have humiliated her in front of witnesses, and every second is on record." His finger jabbed toward the torn pieces on the counter. "This will not be buried." The trainee at the desk felt her pulse thunder in her ears. Her eyes darted to her monitor one more time. The green letters glowed brighter than ever, as if demanding courage. "Dr. Maya Johnson, executive clearance, verified passenger." The truth was right there, undeniable. Her lips parted, but fear clenched them shut again. Maya turned slightly toward her, her gaze soft but firm. She did not need to speak. The look alone was enough to press against the young woman's silence. The weight of history, of injustice, of every unspoken word that had allowed moments like this to happen, all bore down on her in that single stare. The officer shifted his stance, his discomfort visible now. He spoke low, almost hesitant. "Ma'am, I am ordering you one last time. Step away from the gate." But even as he spoke, his eyes betrayed the conflict. He knew what had just happened. He knew the crowd saw it too. Maya drew in a steady breath. Her voice came calm, even deliberate. "You do not order me away from what I have already earned. You only reveal what you are willing to destroy to keep me from it." The silence that followed was not empty. It was charged, alive, waiting. Every camera light burned brighter. Every witness leaned closer. And in that moment, the balance tipped further, the truth no longer hidden but demanding to be spoken aloud. Maya let the torn fragments rest on the counter without touching them. Her silence was not weakness. It was preparation. She reached into her blazer pocket and pulled out her phone with deliberate calm. One button pressed, one name spoken. "Nia," she said, her tone firm but measured. "Initiate Protocol 7. Document everything." The words cut through the air like a gavel. The crowd stirred. Heads turned. Phones caught every syllable. The officer froze mid-step, glancing toward the manager with uncertainty. On the other end of the call, a voice answered instantly, clear and professional. "Confirmed, Dr. Johnson. Protocol 7 is live. All feeds are recording. All staff actions are logged. Compliance board has been alerted." The manager's face drained of color for a split second before he barked louder, trying to mask it. "Do not be fooled. She is bluffing. She is no doctor, no executive. She is a fraud with a phone, nothing more." But the crowd had shifted. Doubt, once aimed at Maya, now turned on the people in uniform. A woman whispered, "Who has a protocol number on command if they are lying?" Another voice followed, "This is bigger than they realize." The flight attendant crossed her arms, trying to steady her own faltering confidence. "Nice act. Calling your friend to play along? That is not going to work here." She looked around as if seeking support, but the only eyes meeting hers were skeptical, even hostile. The trainee at the desk gripped the edge of her monitor. The glowing green confirmation still stared back at her. Executive clearance. Verified identity. Everything matched. Every second she stayed silent. The knot in her chest tightened. She stole a glance at Maya, who stood unshaken, phone still in hand, gaze steady as if she had known this moment would come. The officer shifted again, the cuff still heavy at his side, but his stance was no longer confident. His voice cracked slightly when he spoke. "Ma'am, you are escalating the situation." Maya's response was immediate, calm, unwavering. "No, I am recording the escalation you chose. Every word, every action, every insult." The silence that followed felt electric. Passengers shifted, murmurs swelled, and phones continued to capture everything. For the first time, the power dynamic tilted. From the far side of the gate, the businessman with silver hair raised his voice again. "You called her a fraud. You tore her documents. You humiliated her in public. And now she is standing taller than all of you." His words struck like a verdict, echoed by nods and whispers from the crowd. The manager's jaw clenched. He pointed at Maya, his voice desperate. "She is lying! She is nothing!" Maya lifted her chin, her voice steady and sharp. "If I were nothing, you would not be so afraid of the truth I carry." And with that, the storm she had allowed to build around her began to turn. The witnesses were no longer passive. They were leaning closer, standing taller, and choosing sides. The silence that had once protected the uniforms was breaking apart, and the tide was shifting toward justice. The officer's radio crackled at his side, a faint reminder of authority that no longer felt solid. He hesitated, shifting his weight, eyes darting between Maya and the restless crowd. Every phone pointed at him made the badge on his chest feel less like power and more like evidence waiting to be reviewed. Maya raised her voice, not in anger but in clarity, every word landing like stone on marble. "My name is Dr. Maya Johnson, Chief Executive Officer of Horizon Global Airlines. I signed the paychecks that allow you to wear those uniforms, and today you tore the passport of the woman who owns the very system you are abusing." The declaration detonated in the gate like thunder. Gasps erupted, sharp and disbelieving. A man dropped his coffee cup, liquid splashing across the tiles. A woman clapped a hand over her mouth. Phones jolted higher, recording with frantic certainty. The manager staggered back a step, his face blanching. "That is impossible," he muttered, voice cracking. You cannot be." His words trailed off, hollow and weak. The flight attendant shook her head violently, denial dripping from every motion. "She is bluffing. She has to be bluffing. No real executive would dress like that, travel like this, show up without an entourage." But the businessman with silver hair stepped forward, his eyes blazing. "I know her. Forbes profile 2 years ago. She turned Horizon Global around after the recession. That is her. That is Maya Johnson." The crowd erupted. Murmurs became shouts. Disbelief turned into outrage. A mother with her teenage son pointed toward the counter. "You humiliated the owner of this airline," the boy added. "And we all saw it." The officer froze in place, his hand falling away from the cuffs. The authority that once weighed on his belt felt useless now. He swallowed hard, his voice hesitant. "Dr. Johnson, if that is true." Maya cut him off, her tone sharp as a blade. "It is true, and every second you doubted it is recorded, logged, and now witnessed. The trainee at the desk finally found her courage. Her voice shook, but she forced the words out. Her name has been green on my screen since the beginning. Executive clearance. Verified. I saw it. I stayed silent because I was afraid. But not anymore. The dam broke. Gasps filled the air, followed by cheers. A man clapped loudly. A woman shouted, "Speak it louder!" The trainee's voice rose, trembling but fierce. She belongs here. She always belonged here. You all knew it. The flight attendant stumbled back, her face drained of color. The manager's jaw worked soundlessly. No defense left. The officer stood still, pale, caught between duty and disgrace. And Maya, standing in the center of the storm, did not raise her voice. She did not need to. Her calm was the verdict, and the truth had already shifted the entire room. The silence that followed was not peace. It was collapse. The flight attendant's hands trembled at her sides, the torn fragments of the passport still scattered on the counter like the evidence of her own downfall. The manager's lips moved, but no words came. His authority, once booming and unshakable, now cracked like glass underfoot. The officer shifted back, the cuffs no longer a threat but a weight he did not dare raise. His eyes dropped, shame filling the space where power once stood. Around them, the passengers who had been witnesses now became something more. They were no longer silent bystanders. They were a jury, and their verdict was written across their faces. Phones stayed high, recording every flicker of fear, every bead of sweat. A woman near the window whispered, "They are finished." A man replied, "This video is going viral before we board." The businessman with silver hair took a step closer to Maya, his voice strong, resolute. "They tried to erase you, but the only thing they erased was themselves." The crowd murmured in agreement, nods spreading like wildfire. The teenage girl who had spoken earlier raised her phone and declared loudly, "This is history. Remember this moment." Her words sparked clapping, hesitant at first, then louder. Applause broke through the tension, passengers standing taller, no longer afraid to choose a side. The flight attendant's composure shattered. She turned desperately toward the manager. "Say something. Do something. She cannot be who she says she is." Her voice cracked, betraying her fear. The manager shook his head slowly, his face pale, sweat sliding down his temple. "She is, and we destroyed ourselves the second we touched her documents." His voice was hollow, stripped of certainty, as if he were already rehearsing his own defense in a courtroom. The trainee at the desk stood, her voice louder now, no longer trembling. "You humiliated a black woman who owns this airline. You called her a fraud when the system said otherwise, and I stayed silent. I will not stay silent again." Her eyes burned with conviction. "Everyone here saw it. Everyone here knows it." Ugh. The officer, unable to hold her gaze, took a step back. The cuffs at his belt clinked softly, useless metal now echoing like chains on his own reputation. Maya turned her head slowly, her calm unbroken. Her voice was even deliberate. "What you destroyed today was not my passport. It was your dignity, your authority, your claim to fairness." She paused, letting the silence deepen. "And the world is watching." The crowd erupted again, this time not in gasps but in cheers. The atmosphere shifted entirely. The humiliation meant for her had turned back on those who delivered it. And in that moment, the ones who believed they held power were revealed as powerless, while Maya stood unshaken, the center of gravity in a room that had finally tilted toward truth. The manager's voice cracked as he tried to salvage control. "This is a misunderstanding. We can fix this. We can handle it internally." His words stumbled out, each syllable thinner than the last, stripped of the authority he once swung like a weapon. Maya lifted her phone again, her calm unbroken. "Nia," she said, steady and firm, "terminate their access, all of them." The reply came sharp and immediate through the speaker. "Confirmed, credentials revoked, identification badges locked, incident logged for legal escalation." At that exact moment, the gate's scanner lights flickered red. The manager swiped his badge instinctively, as if to prove his survival, but the machine flashed. "Access denied," his face drained of color. He tried again, frantic, but the denial tone echoed louder, sharper, final. The flight attendant fumbled with her lanyard, her fingers shaking as she pressed her card against the scanner. The red light blinked back like a sentence delivered. She staggered a step, her breath shallow. as if the floor beneath her had dropped away. The officer reached for his radio, but the device emitted only static. His system had been cut too. He froze, realizing the full weight of what had just happened. In front of every witness, his authority had been dismantled not with force, but with a single command. The crowd erupted in gasps and murmurs. A man in a baseball cap pointed toward the counter. "She just shut them out, right here, in front of all of us," a woman added, her voice trembling with awe. She did not raise her voice once, and she ended them. The trainee's breath caught, relief washing over her face. She stood taller now, no longer shackled by fear. "It is done," she whispered, her words for herself but heard by those nearest her. "They cannot hurt her anymore." The businessman with silver hair nodded slowly, almost reverently. "Justice," he said. "Real justice." The manager stumbled back, his badge still clutched in his hand like a relic that had lost all meaning. "You cannot do this," he muttered weakly, his eyes darting toward Maya. "You do not have that power." Maya turned to face him, her voice calm, deliberate, each word like a closing door. "I do not need to prove power, you just lived it." Phones rose higher, capturing every flicker of panic, every shade of disbelief. Passengers clapped, some cheered, others simply stood in stunned silence, their eyes fixed on the woman who had been humiliated minutes before and who now stood above the ruins of false authority. The flight attendant's shoulders slumped, her defiance gone. The officer stepped back, his gaze on the floor. The manager collapsed into silence, no longer the loudest voice in the room, but the quietest. And Maya remained where she had always been, centered, unshaken, her dignity intact, while everything they thought they controlled slipped through their hands like sand. The terminal was no longer tense with threat. It was alive with revelation. The crowd, once whispering, now spoke freely. Some clapped, some shouted their support, and others simply stared in awe at the woman who had turned humiliation into triumph without raising her voice. The manager stood frozen, his badge useless, his authority gone. The flight attendant stared at the shredded passport on the counter, realizing it was not Maya's future she had torn apart, but her own career. The officer shifted uneasily, stripped of the power that once hung heavy at his belt. Maya's phone was still in her hand, her voice calm as ever. "Nia," she said, "log this moment. Mark it as final. Their authority has ended." The answer came back steady. "Logged. Systems updated. Legal teams informed." She turned, not to the staff, but to the witnesses who had recorded every second. Her eyes swept the room, not as a plea, but as a declaration. What happened here is not new. It has happened in hotels, in banks, in offices, and now in an airport gate. They believed silence would hide it. But silence is over. A hush fell across the passengers, every phone pointed at her. She continued, her tone precise, her words measured like steel. They mistook dignity for fraud. They mistook composure for weakness. That was their last mistake. The teenage girl lifted her phone higher, whispering through tears, "She is the CEO. She is really the CEO." Her mother pulled her close, nodding. Around them, passengers began to applaud. The sound rose, wave after wave, until the terminal was filled with it. The businessman with silver hair spoke again, his voice carrying pride. "You stood against humiliation and turned it into justice. That is leadership." And Maya inclined her head slightly, acknowledging without basking. Then she spoke once more, her words the closing sentence to a story that had shifted an entire room. "I do not need to replay this video. I am the result of everyone that came before it, and today, so are you." The clapping grew louder, joined by cheers. Phones captured her walking past the counter, stepping through the gate that had once been barred to her. Each step was steady, deliberate, the stride of someone who had reclaimed the ground beneath her feet. Behind her, the staff stood in ruins of their own making. In front of her, passengers parted like a path of respect. And in that moment, the truth was undeniable. Dignity had won, justice had spoken, and power had shifted forever. The world would see the clip, but those in the terminal had lived it. They had witnessed the quiet storm of a black CEO who never needed to shout, because her very presence was the loudest verdict of all.